Hey everybody, thanks again for joining me on my adventures in homebrewing. I'm Dan Matthews, and today we're extremely fortunate to have someone I've been following on YouTube for quite a bit, and he's helped me out with just through his videos and deciding what I want to do with my brewing kit. It's Brian Huntley from Short Circuit Brewers. How's it going, Brian?
Good, Dan. How are you?
Good, man. I gotta say this in advance. Thank you so much for coming and being part of the podcast. We're brand new, and all the help we get is awesome.
Sure, not a problem.
So, before we kick into it, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into home brewing, and how you started your channel?
So, got into homebrewing kind of by chance, really. Went to a impromptu kind of family reunion out in California, and one of my cousins actually was a brewer at that time. And at this family reunion, he had brought a bunch of homebrew with him, a bunch of different stuff, kind of nothing like, no crazy IPAs or anything like that, but some holiday ales, some different types of beer, just stuff with a lot of flavor to it. And before that, I was kind of a yellow fizzy drinker, and whenever I tasted these different beers, it was just like a whole world open up. And it was, I like cooking too. And so it was like, well, this is really interesting. You can do this with beer. I'd never tasted anything like that before. And so I went back home and I told my wife, I said, I'd like to try to brew beer. And so she was, she's like, okay, fine. Because she enjoyed it as well. And so I bought my first kit, and it was just it was an extract kit with a couple of buckets and the muslin bags and all that stuff. And then I remember distinctly the first uh, kit that I brewed was a holiday ale, had like cinnamon and spices and stuff in it, and it actually turned out pretty good. No issues at all. I bottled that first batch up, and then went from that to, I said, well, okay, I like the extract was kind of cool. Well, but what else can I do? So then I went into my first partial mash. Did that on the stove in the kitchen, steeping the grains and all that, and then using the extract for the other part of it, and that was an Irish red. It turned out pretty good, and I thought, well, this is pretty cool, but I think I want more control. I was kind of hooked on it then, so I want to do more. Want to really like get a hold of the process, and so right after that, I bought the Igloo cooler, and I actually purchased a kegel on Craigslist, and did my first all grain Irish red. It turned out pretty good. So it was like, I went extract, partial mash, all grain. So like my learning curve was like basically vertical. I went 1, 2, 3, and then it was all grain from there on out. I mean, I've done a few extract batches here and there just for the fun of it, but I've been doing all grain ever since. And that was about 10 years ago, somewhere around there.
Oh, all right. That's
And
awesome.
the channel came from when I met the guy on Craigslist to purchase the kegel. Actually, you know what? I'm sorry that I said that wrong, because I'm trying to think of where I got the kegel from. It was when I sold the kegel, was that I met one of the people that I kind of started the channel with, and it was one of those things where I met this guy, and he was into brewing, and I sold him the kegel, and then he came over. I was in the process of building a 3-vessel Herm system at that point in time. I had like a rudimentary controller in a wooden box. It was kind of funny. What rat's nest wiring, just a mess. I knew where everything was, but if you looked at it, you're like, oh my gosh. So, I had a boil kettle that was electric, and I was using like a rims tube for maintaining the mash temperature. So I invited this guy over and last second he's like, hey, he's like on his way. Do you care if I bring my buddy? And I'm like, well, okay, sure, whatever,
A little late now,
And
but sure.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And my wife's freaking out. She's like, what if they're serial killers or whatever? And I'm like, well, they're beer people, so they can't be too bad, So they came over and were just absolutely amazed by, here you are. I'm was right about the boil whenever they came over, and
Mhm.
the wort's in there boiling, and it's like completely silent. You're used to propane where it sounds like a jet airplane taking off,
Yeah.
and it was one of those things. It was just like, we were like cavemen poking at fire, it was something else. And so then both of those guys went electric with their brewing systems, and then we got it together and said, well, hey, because we were watching YouTube at that time too, all the different things,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was like, hey, well, what if we all three of us started a channel? So we did, and it went like that for a year or two, and then kind of all three of us kind of lost a little bit of interest, and then I at some point, I think it was about 2014 or 13 or 14, something like that, just kind of got some interest back into it and started doing it again, and the other guys just kind of bowed out. So ever since then, it's just been pretty much me and the wife doing the videos and stuff, and it's been a great community. It's been a lot of fun, and I enjoy just about every type of brewing. I mean, people ask me all the time, what's your favorite system to brew on? And it's kind of a cheesy answer, but it's like the one I'm brewing on right now. It's like,
Yeah.
whatever's making me beer right now. So I've done a lot of brewing on different systems, but it's always fun to brew and taste the efforts of the beer you created, and tweak recipes and learn different things,
Yeah. That's
and
one thing I've noticed, is that people are like, well, why are you going electric? Or why didn't you go propane? Well, for my footprint where I am at home, I'm in my garage. So I could do propane, but then it's, well, where do I store everything? So for me, an electric system is so much easier to store and put away at the end of a brew day than it is to put away a kegel, than it is to put away an Igloo HLT, than it is to put away, a mash tun,
your burner and your
the burner, the
propane tank.
propane. Exactly. It's so much easier
Right.
to do that. And one thing I have been noticing a lot with a lot of electric systems, there are a huge price variance, be it from like with RoboBrew, with say, where if you got the original RoboBrew 3.1, it was like, when I bought it, it was like $450 Canadian.
Right.
Now the new Brewzilla, the same size as the 3.1, is about $500. Then you go up to the big sucker, you're looking at $600 or $700 or more.
Right, the 65 liter, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess as a new brewer, how do you go about choosing the right setup for yourself? And if I was considering electric, why should I really take it into consideration?
I think that you kind of hit on some of the pluses of going electric, is that, most of them are all self-contained. Some of them have an external pump, but most of them are all self-contained, very small footprint. You mash and you boil and everything all in the same vessel. Depending on what your process is, you might need another vessel for sparge water or whatever. But it does make it a lot easier. Cleanup is so much easier from an all-in-one vessel standpoint. I oftentimes, recommend that if somebody's just getting into it, and I know a lot of people like to just jump into, spending a bunch of money on a lot of things. I always recommend that somebody get into it with a little bit of basic equipment. You can do a partial volume boil on your stove with a 5-gallon pot, and to take it out of the kitchen, because that's one of the big contentions a lot of times is, you're in your significant other's domain where they're cooking, or maybe you're the one that cooks, but you're in the house and you're and maybe the smell is unpleasant to some folks. I mean, I'm fortunate, I love it, my wife loves it, so I don't have any issue with that. I mean, it's, when I'm brewing, she's like, oh my God, it smells so good in the house, so that's not an issue for me. But you can get some really nice induction plates that are, for a fairly decent price, that would allow you to move out into the garage or, on the back deck or whatever, and do that. But, and then see if you like it first, see if you like the process, see if you like, doing the bottling, see if you like doing the length of time that it takes, because it does take some time, and you can start out doing extract in one of those type of situations. And that's not even to say that if you like it and you're like, hey, this is something that I want to do, but I'm not quite ready to move into all grain yet, or even a partial mash, you can buy one of those all-in-one systems and use it with extract, no problem. And then, as you progress in your brewing knowledge and your process, you can add more techniques and things to your process by, you can do a partial mash in the basket. You can do, you can do just straight up extract without having the basket in it all, and just, bring your water up to temperature and mix in your, shut the burners off, mix your extract in, and then bring it up to a boil. And it kind of helps you be a little future proof, if you will, where, if you like it after doing it for a few batches, and you're really hooked on it, then it's certainly not a bad investment to do with buying one of the all-in-one systems with the ability to do an all grain batch down the road.
Okay. So I know with the all-in-one systems, there are a lot of them out there, be it Mash and Boil, be it RoboBrew, be it Grainfather. I think Anvil has one.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, the Foundry. I don't think it's available in Canada, but it isn't available in the U.S. here.
So, I mean, there's a large selection of these units out there. How does one go about, especially as a new guy to it, choosing the right one for them? I mean, I'm a bit of a beer geek and gadget geek, so I went down and I drilled down and find out what was best for me. But if I'm not that inclined to go that deep as I did, how does one choose the right one?
I think you have to look at, okay, first off, what size of batches am I brewing? And if I'm brewing normal batches, am I brewing, a big beer with a lot of alcohol? What's the capacity that the system is going to allow me to brew from an all grain standpoint? If you're mashing grains, what's the maximum capacity of the system? Most of them are pretty close to the same. A lot of it comes down to the biggest variation in a lot of them that I see is the accuracy of the controller. Some of the systems, the Grainfather and the Anvil, have more of a, I guess you would call it like an industrial or even a commercial type controller in them, where they will hold temperature a little bit more accurately.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the beginning, when you're doing just, some regular beers and you're kind of striving for that 152, 154 degree range, it's not nearly as much of an issue. But if you start, mashing at a little bit lower temperature and you don't want to fall below that starch conversion range, then you're going to want a controller that's going to be a little more accurate. The RoboBrew has gotten a little bit better with the iteration of the 3.1.1. Originally, it would fluctuate about probably 3 to 5 degrees, and it's gotten better. It still fluctuates a couple of degrees during mash, and the reason that's important is because, depending on what your temperature is for your mash, that determines how much of the sugar is fermentable and how much of it's not fermentable. So, if you are mashing at a temperature that you expect the beer to come out to be, 5% alcohol and it's swinging, way up or way down, then you might wind up with a beer that comes out at, 4.5% and is a lot sweeter than what you intended. So that's the biggest thing to me, is the accuracy of the controllers. The pumps being internal is a plus from a footprint standpoint, but from a, serviceability and a clog standpoint, it can be a little bit of a detriment sometimes, because if you run a lot of hops, doing a hoppy beer or something, and you're trying to recirculate after the boil and do a whirlpool or something like that, then you can clog up those pumps pretty easily sometimes. That's one of the places that the Anvil is a good option with the recirculation kit, because it is an external pump. But there again, it's it's kind of a trade-off. It kind of makes it a little bit more bulky from that standpoint, but it is also good because you can clean out the clogs if you get them. So I haven't really brewed on any that are bad. The other thing I look at too is what's the customer service. I mean, you have to think about okay, the price is good to look at, but at the same time, if I have an issue, if something breaks or something goes bad, you know, are there vendors that are readily available to be able to service that part? Are other people having problems with, getting parts for it or having customer service? Most of the companies are pretty good about it. I mean, I haven't had too many because I talk to a lot of people with all different systems all the time, and there's not really a lot of them that I've seen that have been, all this, the customer service is horrible. But it is something to think about because, it is an electronic device, and the law of averages says that there's going to be so many failures in a production line of, electronic parts that are made in China. That's where they're all
Yeah.
made. So I mean, you've got that reliability factor, and how good how reliable is it, and then if you have a problem, how well are you going to be serviced after the sale? So I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. As far as purchasing them goes, there are there's a few quirks with each one of them, different things. Like the Grainfather is pretty expensive. It's definitely a capable and well-made brewing system. The Brewzilla, formerly RoboBrew, is another good system. No issues with that. I brew on all three of the ones that I have not brewed on a mash and boil, so I can't really speak from a point of knowledge on that. But I know that sometimes those have some issues with there's a sensor in the bottom that can get either hops or grain matter on them and cause them to trip during boiling or mashing, and and the reset button's on the bottom. So
Yeah.
imagine how inconvenient that is if you've got it full of water and grain.
I just see everything everywhere on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, but it's that's one of those things that it's just something to know about the system. So I think a lot of and availability, and can you buy it? What can you buy from your local homebrew shop? What do they stock? Online is good, but it's also nice to be able to, especially when you're starting out, to be able to support your local homebrew shop because they're going to be there. The advent of the internet has certainly helped with new brewer questions, but sometimes if you need to run down and grab some yeast or some hops or whatever, it's nice to have a relationship with that local homebrew shop and support your local businesses, and they can give you advice and stuff too that's really nice, and they may even have a homebrew club that you can be a part of and get some advice locally and meet other brewers that it certainly helps to. You can get a lot of advice from someone online, but to have somebody there with you brewing and watching what your process is, an experienced brewer watching a new brewer, you can just talk about different things that come up as you go through the brew day that somebody may not think about telling you online.
Well, that's so true. I mean, I'm fortunate in the sense that, well, one, I'm retired, so which is awesome. The next part is that I work part-time in a brewery that's 5 minutes from my house. So I'm lucky in the sense that my boss is the head brewer, but I also get to pick his brain on things on the brewing process and things like that. But I wasn't
Sure.
able to actually ask him about anything about buying kit in the sense that he's like, well, I used a propane burner, I used a keg, and when I ground it out the top, and
Right.
everything else. I'm like, oh, that's great. So if you want that, I'll give it to you. And I'm like, no. One, it's not soldier proof. Two, my wife would kill me.
Right.
But it's also the fact that I was looking for something that was a ease of use. And one thing I have found a lot is with my RoboBrew, I find it extremely easy to use. I mean, I wish the controller was set up a little higher on it, just because I find that part's a bit of a pain in the butt. But other than that, it works like a dream. I mean, I like the idea that I can do steps with it. I can set it up the night before to have the strike water all ready to roll.
Right, a delayed start. Yep, that's great.
And then and go from there. I don't know if new brewers actually know how readily available information is on equipment out there. And I'm pretty sure a lot of them don't even know where to go and start. I mean, yeah, you go to your homebrew store, but you walk into those places, it is so overwhelming. as a new
Right.
person walking in,
Stuff
you're like,
everywhere.
you're like a kid in a candy store. It's like, I want one of these, I want one of those, but you're like, okay, but I'm on a budget. It's hard going in. I mean, if you are a new guy going into one of these places, like, how do you go in and not like come out being like completely broke?
Right. Well, I mean, it comes down to, and I encounter a lot of people asking me kind of that same question all the time. Should I get this? Should I do that? Should I get this? Should I get that? And I think the best way is to start simple. Start with a brewing system, whether it's your kettle with a induction burner or whatever the case may be, a bucket. There and a hydrometer capper. There's a lot of kits that come with a fermentation bucket, a bottling bucket, some sanitizer, some cleaner. There's that's probably one of the best ways to go, and that's how I got started, was with that. And then when you have that, you have a nice solid base to start with, and then you can kind of build from there. But I see a lot of people try to jump way ahead, and sometimes it's not always the best thing to do. I think you're better off learning to walk before you run.
Yeah.
Because more equipment and more things and more processes can lead to more variables that may cause some confusion, and diagnosing an issue with a lot of different variables is kind of hard sometimes. The one of the funniest things that happens all the time is new brewers, they see somebody using a refractometer. They're all over it. They get a refractometer. They're taking their original gravity, perfect. Then they're hitting me up going, "Hey, I don't understand. It's not fermenting anymore, but my gravity is, instead of being 1010, it's like 1024." And the funniest thing to me is I see these things in forums a lot, and the first thing everybody does is start talking about the process, and what did you do? What was this? What was that? And a lot of times they don't know. But what I found a lot of times is I usually ask one question, and it's like, what are you taking a gravity reading with? Okay, a
Hydrometer is your friend.
refractometer. I said, well, what are you taking your final gravity reading with? A refractometer. Okay, don't do that.
Hydrometer is your friend.
Exactly. So that's one of those cases where, equipment can cause confusion because they don't understand how it works, and why it does the things that it does. So that's just an example of somebody trying to jump ahead before they really understand exactly what's going on. So I think it's good to start simple, and then just build upon that. And so I, a lot of the simplest brew days, I mean, I have a 3-vessel Herm system with the Herms coil and the 2 elements and mash tun and all that stuff. And I mean, it's fun to brew on. I feel like I'm brewing on like a real brewery system. But at the same time, I enjoy the single vessel system, just brewing a batch, and just getting it done, and very little cleanup, nothing really, no muss, no fuss, and you put 5 gallons of beer in the fermenter and you're done.
Yeah,
So
that's what I love about my all-in-one system too. It's fantastic. But the part I want to touch on the part you were saying about the refractometer and all that. I will say this: a hydrometer is your friend, but my hydrometer and I have a love-hate relationship. I'll read it. I'm like, all right, you're 1040. All right, that's the original gravity. Whatever else, come back, do my final. I'm like, you're 1020. That doesn't seem right. So I'm like, all right, well, we'll see what the Plato airlock says. And it's saying, oh, no, you're about 1015, 1020, or 1010. I'm like, what am I not reading right? But that comes with experience, where you learn how to read those things properly and things like that.
Right. And, temperature is variable with those, and,
Exactly. So
that type of thing.
Back on topic, when we're looking at kettles and things like that, and I do know this from dealing with friends who have done this, is that they've always said to make sure the quality of the kit, because you don't want to scorch anything. And I've seen guys scorch stuff in the bottom of their kettles, and then they've left the kettles for like 2 or 3 days soaking with PBW in it, to get it clean. Is there a way to make sure that when you're buying something that it's a really good quality vessel and you're not going to scorch anything? I mean, you're going to scorch it if you leave it alone and you don't pay attention to it, but you're not always going to be there all the time, because every now and then, oh, you're going to go for a bathroom break. Oh, I got to go to the fridge to grab a beer.
Mhm.
Is there a way to make sure that, other than sitting on it, to make sure it's not going to scorch and that the vessel is actually worth investing in, that it's got that right quality?
Yeah, so the things you really want to look for is either low wattage density is good, which basically means that in the bottom of these all-in-ones there are coils that go around in there, and depending on the size or the length of the coil as it wraps and goes back and forth around underneath of the kettle, the longer it is, usually the lower wattage density it is. And what that means is that, per square inch of element touching the bottom of the all-in-one system, there is a certain amount of wattage in that area. So, imagine if you had just a single loop around and you're putting 1500 watts of power through that versus having one that loops around and then, coils back around and, has a couple of loops in it. The wattage is spread out over a larger area, and that's what helps prevent the scorching issues. um, Most of them are low wattage density. Some of them are ultra low wattage density. The biggest thing that I think most of the scorching comes from, a lot of times, people not slowing the flow down enough for circulation and
Okay.
having too little of liquid in the bottom.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, I mean, you put a gallon of oil in a pot on the stove to fry something, and it takes a while for it to heat up, and it has a pretty maintains a pretty good temperature. But you put a half an inch in there, and it's smoking in no time because of the fact that there's
Yeah.
not a lot of liquid for the surface area. So I think that's where a lot of the scorching comes from. A lot of times, I don't think that the scorching comes from the boil. If people took out the grain and poured out the wort, they would probably see that the scorching had already occurred before the boil. So,
Okay. Right.
that's one of the biggest things that I think that I see is people circulating too fast, and then there's not enough wort in the bottom of the vessel below the basket
Hmm.
to allow for even heating. And then when you get that sugary water in a uh, in a confined space that's not very deep, then it's going to want to caramelize and basically burn on the bottom.
Okay. Right on. Is there anything that you would think would be some of the major points that a newer brewer should consider when they're going out looking at something? I mean, we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but if there's like one or two key things someone like myself who's just starting out should look at, what would they be?
I think quality construction is one. Look at the switches, look at the buttons, look at the controller. Look at all the things that are on the exterior of the vessel. Does Are there large gaps? Or are there areas where water or wart? Because I mean we're dealing with liquid and electricity here, so are there places where water can get into those controls and cause issues? Is it Does it seem flimsy? Because I know that there are some. I have people ask me a lot of times. Hey, I saw on AliExpress I can get this brewing system for $200.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, and but you get what you pay for. So it's one of those things where just make sure that everything visually looks good. If you can inspect it, yourself. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of good knowledge out there, both in print, on I say print, I mean text online, and also videos reviewing things. I do a lot of that myself, but I think that's probably and going back to what I said earlier was making sure that if you're doing, am I doing large beers? Do I need the capacity to do a mash of 20 pounds of grain? Is that system going to handle it? And then on the flip side of that, hey, I'm only doing 2.5 gallon batches. Is the system going to allow me to do that? Does the basket sit down far enough that I can do a 2.5 gallon batch and still have my grain immersed in the liquid to do the conversion? So I mean, there's a couple of different things to consider there. Some of the systems have a lot of space underneath of the basket, whereas some of them have a lot less. So that's a consideration as well. If you're doing smaller batches, there's a lot of people are doing 2 to 2.5 gallon batches nowadays, and just so they can they maybe don't drink as much beer, or they want to have more variety at any given time, where they can not have to go through 5 gallons of beer to get to the next one. So those are some considerations that I certainly think are good ones to look at.
Awesome. Well, we're going to call it quits right there. Well, thank you very much for everything, Brian. It's been fantastic having you on the show. Lots of information. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the people that I have listening will, especially the new guys, will take a lot from it. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and hopefully maybe
Sure.
down the road I can have you back on again.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.